I pray that your week has gone well, no matter how busy the holiday brought. I pray that you had a beautiful week. Today we are going to examine how Paul handled one of the most challenging trials of his life. In this case, he was literally on trial. He had been called before the Sanhedrin to give a defense for the riot that we had witnessed last week in Acts chapter 22. However, as we examined that chapter in the last few weeks, we have found out that Paul is not guilty of anything. He didn't do anything wrong. He didn't cause a riot. This entire scenario is absolutely based on the basis of a series of misjudgments and gossip about Paul. The title of today's message is Integrity Through Distress. We're in the book of Acts chapter 23, verses 1 through 11. Now, throughout our walk with Jesus, we are going to find ourselves in times of distress. It's going to happen. It's part of life. It's going to take a toll on us. It's going to chip away at our very being. And it's going to begin to dissuade us from not only wanting to learn, but it is also going to take us away from wanting to keep our desires away from doing God's work. Let me say that again. What happens in our life, the distresses that takes us through our life, is going to take us away from God. It's going to take our eyes off of what He has called us to do if we're not careful. We are now going to view a group of religious leaders, though, who had decided exactly who Paul was and what he would do when he came to Jerusalem, despite not even knowing him. How many times in your life has something like this happened to you? Where somebody, a person, a group of people, somebody had already made up their minds about you before even getting to know you? How many times has somebody decided they didn't want to get to know you based on who you have now become in your walk with Christ? All of us have at one point or another. When Paul came to Jerusalem, he made arrangements with a local church to take some men who were completing their vows to the temple to fulfill the rites under the temple law. He did this to show that he was respecting the temple. He was respecting the Jewish beliefs. Even though he wasn't following them because he was now following Christ, he still showed that respect. But they assumed that he was doing something wrong. They assumed that he was taking Greeks into the temple grounds where they didn't belong. And they accused him of it. The riot that broke out was so great, so powerful, that the Roman soldiers had to come into the temple grounds, which technically they weren't allowed in order to take control of the situation. They took Paul away. And then this happened, and, well, let's look back on last week. Acts chapter 22, verse 30. The next day, because the commander wanted to know for certain why Paul was accused by the Jews, he released him from his bonds and then commanded the chief priests and all of their council, the Sanhedrin, to appear. And he brought Paul down and set him before the Sanhedrin. Here we are, the next day. Paul is appearing before the Sanhedrin, which the Sanhedrin, if you don't remember, is the Jewish ruling religious council, the judges of Judaism. That is the scene that we are beginning with today. Please stand for the reading of God's word. Acts chapter 23, verses 1 through 11. Then Paul, looking earnestly at the council, said, "Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day." And the high priest Ananias commanded those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth. Then Paul said to him, "God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. For you sit to judge me according to the law, and do you command me to be struck contrary to the law?" And those who stood by said, "Do you revile God's high priest?" And then Paul said, "I did not know, brethren, that he was the high priest. For it is written, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people." But when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, "Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Concerning the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am being judged." And when he had said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For Sadducees say that there is no resurrection and no angel or spirit, but the Pharisees confess both. Remember, the Sadducees and the Pharisees are completely opposite of this situation. The Pharisees are the only ones of the group that fully believe in resurrections and angels and spirits. Keep that in mind. And then there arose a loud outcry, and the scribes of the Pharisees' party arose and protested, saying, "We find no evil in this man. But if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him, let us not fight against God." Now when there arose a great dissension, the commander, fearing lest Paul might be pulled to pieces by them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him by force from among them and bring him into the barracks. But the following night, the Lord stood by Paul and said, "Be of good cheer, Paul, for as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must also bear witness at Rome." You may be seated. As we look at how this scene is unfolding, we see two very well-respected religious leaders both committing a wrong. What is interesting is that we see only one of them who has the integrity to admit it and to get back on the right path. And who was that? It was Paul. Notice how Paul enters. He's had all night long to think about this situation, to come up with things that he wants to say to the council. So he walks in and he's boldly bringing in his presence. He walks in completely prepared for what he wanted to say. And Luke is describing his defense this way in verse 1. "My brothers," look at this. There is an earnest love for each and every one of these men that are judging against him. "My brothers, I have fulfilled my duty to God in all good conscience to this day." You understand that Paul is beginning with a defense that he has used before. The aim is to find common ground. Understand the reasoning here, though. He is really on trial for a false accusation because some people believe that he doesn't respect the law. that he doesn't respect their belief in the law. And so, what does he do? He begins by addressing each of the judges as his own brother. And after all, he is a Pharisee. He is one of them. And so he says that with a clear conscience, and what he is saying there is that he knows he has kept the law. He may be teaching what Jesus taught, but at the same time, he is keeping the Jewish law. He's trying to find that common ground with them. He is trying to show them exactly who he is. It is a tactic that he did use before, and we don't know how many times, though, that he has used this exact scenario. But we do know from Luke that he used it with the elders of the church of Ephesus. And Paul said this in Acts chapter 20, verse 18. You know from the first day that I came to Asia, in what manner I always lived among you. In other words, he is saying, you know me. You know how I live. You know what I have done this whole time because I was with you. I served the Lord with great humility, with tears flowing, although I was severely tested by the plots of the Jews. And you know that I have not hesitated to preach anything that would be helpful to you, but have taught you publicly from house to house. Do you see it? It's a different setting, but essentially it is the exact same defense. I know what people are saying about me, but my life is different now. There's a conservationist named Jack Miner who once said this: a man's reputation is what other people think of him. His character looks like what he is. It's the perception of others. The defense of Paul in Acts chapter 20 and chapter 23 is essentially, I know what people are saying about me. But if you look at my life, that is not who I am. Don't believe the rumors that you hear about me. See the proof of what I'm actually doing. It's an appeal that he is going to use later in his letters, asking people to look at his life. It was an argument that was mostly effective for him, but it's not being effective here. Look at verse number 2. At this, the high priest Ananias ordered those standing near Paul to strike him on the mouth. He's resorting to violence now, punching him. I don't know about you, but I give Paul a lot of credit here. Because when we hear those words, we know automatically that this is going to be an offensive act. We may even take defense, do a block here or there, maybe strike back. I give Paul a lot of credit here. But look at the meaning behind it. By having Paul struck, the high priest is punishing Paul for what he had just said. In one move, violent move, the high priest dismissed Paul's defense completely out of hand and then broke Jewish law himself. The strike was an act of judgment. The high priest was punishing Paul. It was a move to make him stop what he was saying. It was telling Paul's defense that it was wrong. His defense was inappropriate. His defense was a lie. Now, we're not sure, we meaning scholars, myself, everybody included, are not sure which that is, though. What is sure is that the high priest essentially tipped his hand to no matter of what Paul had said. He was already judging him as being guilty. Paul walked in with the minds already made up. He was guilty, and there was no way he was going to prove his innocence. And that was the problem. Because this is a trial. You're supposed to have innocence until proven guilty. Or at least that's how our life is. Granted, though, the trial was because the Roman commander was trying to find out what Paul has done wrong. But the burden of proof was still on the religious leaders who were accusing Paul to prove that he had done something wrong. By pronouncing a punishment before there was even a verdict, that's partial. The high priest was breaking Jewish law. Inside, he may not have had a problem with what was happening, though. Because to him, Paul is guilty. The trial is just a formality. Have you ever been there before? Where someone is accusing you of something, and no matter what you say, no matter what proof you've had, they had already decided your fate and you were wrong. You can probably relate to Paul's reaction. Look at verse 3. Now this, I actually chuckled when I read this. When he's telling the religious leaders that they are whitewashed walls. What does that mean? When you whitewash a fence or a wall, you're covering up the dirtiness. You're covering up the failures, the imperfections. You're making it look good, but underneath, it's not. He is insulting the leaders at this point. Paul is angry. He's mad. And he uses whitewashed wall. It's a picture that he is painting in everyone's mind. He is letting people know that outwardly you are portraying yourselves to be pure and righteous, but actually you are corrupt. You are flawed underneath. It is an emphatic and picturesque way to call somebody a hypocrite. They're being hypocrites. Paul is actually saying, how dare you accuse me of breaking the law? And then you're going to just do it on your own and break the law too? Hypocrites. It looks like Paul was doing the right thing though. But in reality, he is doing the absolute wrong thing. There are several thoughts on why Paul responded the way that he did. Whichever those thoughts are true, it is still inappropriate. There has been a lot of speculation about why Paul said what he did to whom he did it. Some people think that Paul's eyesight may have been poor, so he didn't see who gave the order, being the high priest. Some people might think that Paul had been gone from Jerusalem for so long that he didn't know who it was that ordered the strike. Paul may have also been trying to use irony as part of his defense. There's also a thought from a couple of scholars, actually, that Paul didn't think about who he was talking to. He just simply reacted to the situation. We've done that. My dad used to tell me, you better think before you act. The bottom line, though, is that we don't know why Paul said what he said. We just know that he was wrong. See, the high priest was wrong, and so was Paul. There's a lot of wrongness here in this trial that was just also completely in the wrong. The accusations are absolutely untrue. The trial itself was a sham. It was the great injustice to Paul. Look what happens next in verse 4 and 5. And those who stood by said, do you revile God's high priest? Then Paul said, I did not know, brethren, that he was the high priest, for it is written, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people. Now, given the background of events here, this might be an unexpected result. I mean, Paul did everything that he could to avoid confrontations. He allowed people to beat him in the past. He didn't want confrontations. But these people are falsely accusing him anyways. Paul tried to share with them what Jesus had done, and they beat him for it. And then the next day, he is called in for a trial, unjustly punched during the trial. But more than that, the message communicated was that we have found you guilty even though you don't even know. And we don't know you. Now, going back to basically the judge ordering him to be punched, what do you think the backlash would be today if a judge told the prosecutor to go punch the defendant? I think there'd be a bit of an uproar, which is what should be happening here. Now, if we bundle all of this information, this thought together, Paul had carried a burden for these people throughout his entire ministry that God has called him into. And now, when he is finally able to come to Jerusalem to preach Jesus to them, he is being shut down. We need to think about how frustrated we would be if that happened to us. And then we need to look at those situations. But what does Paul do? Paul backs down. Think about the control that this took for him to do. Paul's reaction was to give a proper response despite the wrongs that had been done to him. He has been lied about. He has been arrested. He has been silenced out of hand from sharing the gospel. He responds by saying, I did not realize who this guy was. And then he gives the reason why his response was wrong. Paul understood a truth that would ring true throughout the entire scriptures. And that truth is in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 17. Obey those who rule over you and be submissive, for they watch out for your souls, as though who must give account. Let them do so with joy and not with grief, for that would be unprofitable for you. When God appoints someone as a leader, we all are supposed to respect that leader, not because of who they are, but because of who he is. He is in control. He is appointing the leadership. Throughout my adult life, there have been plenty of presidents of this nation that I couldn't stand. Plenty of presidents that I don't like as a person. But I am always going to respect the office that that person occupies. The office is where we need to understand these are human beings that have been called by God to do a very difficult job. We may not like the person that God has put into that position, but we have to respect it. We have to stop getting in the way of the person in charge doing what God has called them to do. Because that person isn't in control. God is in control. There are plenty of people who don't deserve any respect at all. And I'm going to even say, even the leaders. There are plenty of leaders that don't deserve respect. But what is the number one reason why we have to respect all people, especially those in power? It's because God has commanded us to respect and to love them too. He knows what he is doing. He knows who these people were yesterday. He knows who they are today. And he knows who they're going to be tomorrow. because God is the one at work here. And so Paul, in essence, is retracting his rebuke. It was an action of great discipline and humility. Now think about this. Paul is still a human. He still has emotions. And he probably didn't want to apologize for his actions at all. But he did. So think about who Paul is. Ananias may have been the high priest, but Paul was the apostle of Christ. He had taken the church to a different level by spending the past several years of his life planting churches all over what they knew to be the entire world. God has used him mightily during that period. In the flesh, he may have felt as if someone he was justified in being an equal to Ananias. Paul could have tried to claim those rights even, but instead he withdraws the insult. And rather than fighting for his rights, what does he do? He backs down. He diffuses the situation, which was an act of humility. And in this act, we begin to see the integrity of Paul. Think of the discipline that he had to have shown throughout this life. In the jail in Philippi, an earthquake opens the door. What does he do? He stays there. He doesn't try to escape. On this journey, he is told hardship awaits you. What does he do? He goes anyways. He doesn't stay away, stay back. This is a man who is willing to do exactly whatever it is that God is calling him to do. He's doing whatever it takes to follow and to be obedient to God. That is humility. What about humility? You'll remember that he and Barnabas went on that first missionary journey together. And then what do? They separated. The reason why is that Paul didn't want to be around John Mark because John Mark made a couple of mistakes. Paul doesn't want to give him another chance, but Barnabas did. Here's the thing. Later, when Paul writes to Timothy, he affirms the values of the companionship of that same John Mark. Paul was humbled enough to admit he made a mistake. Humility was part of that integrity. And then when you have the discipline and the humility put together, then you are going to have the courage and the ability to do the right thing at the right time. Integrity may be hard to define, but we know it when we see it. And we see it here in the life of Paul. The sad thing, though, is that Paul, at this point, knows that he will not be given a chance to share the gospel here. Even worse, his very life is in danger. And despite the adversity around him, what does he keep doing? He keeps his composure. Look at verse 6. But when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, "Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Concerning the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am being judged." He knows that some of them are on one side, the others are on the other side, but collectively they are the Sanhedrin. And he says, "My brothers, I am a Pharisee. I stand trial because of my hope in the resurrection of Christ." When he says this, then the two sides start fighting. The Sadducees say that there is no resurrection and that there aren't any angels or spirits. And then the Pharisees are saying, yes, there is. They couldn't agree. I'm going to just say, on Paul's part, that was brilliant. It was a fantastic tactic. Separate your accusers, turn them against each other, they'll forget about you. Paul didn't lie, though. Paul, being the center of the situation, part of his message was the resurrection of Christ. The resurrection that we all await because of our faith in Jesus. When Paul realized that the trial was a complete sham, when he realized that his life was absolutely in danger, he didn't panic. He just merely turned to an issue that he knew would distract the others. It provided Paul with a way out. That was another part of his integrity, because he was given grace under pressure. When the going got tough, Paul was still able to respond in appropriate and intelligent ways. It got Paul out of the situation, but not without a cost. Luke says that the riot that broke out was so violent that the soldiers had to intervene because they were afraid Paul was going to get torn to pieces. Paul was in the middle of an actual riot inside of the Sanhedrin, which probably wasn't the safest place to be. But the soldiers, they rescued him. They took him out of that situation. They placed him into the barracks, and there he is again, sitting and waiting. Now, I picture that he was probably feeling a little defeated. His mission appeared to be a failure. They wouldn't even listen to his testimony. The defense that he had planned, he got slapped in the face for it. And I'm sure he was feeling defeated. But then God does an amazing thing. And he always does amazing things, especially when we place our trust in him. Just when things seem the darkest for Paul, just when we don't know what to do next because our life has gone into the darkness, God shows up. God may not want to get us out of the situation that we may be in, but God will always let us know that he is there. He will always let us know that we are with him and that he is willing to listen. But we have to be willing to hear his voice. Look at verse 11. Jesus says to him, "Be of good cheer, for as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must also bear witness at Rome." Jesus is telling Paul, take courage. This is another aspect of Paul's integrity, because he is willing to follow God's path, not his own. Paul was a Pharisee. His father was a Pharisee. It was the family business. And yet, he's following Christ. He was proud of his heritage, not just the position, but the nation. We know that Paul longed to see Israel being saved, but he was not preaching in Israel. He was sent to the Gentiles. And now in the midst of his own people, he's being rejected. He's being beaten. And then God comes. God doesn't say, "Paul, I'm going to give you what you want. Tomorrow the people are going to listen to you." God says instead, "You must also testify in Rome. Your trip here is over, Paul. I have someplace else to send you." Notice what we don't have from Paul. Paul doesn't give a response. He doesn't argue with God. God told him to go, and we're going to see that he goes. Because Paul always knows to put God's plan first. And then we see the final integrity trait from Paul, the courage to carry on. At this point in the story, Paul's life is on the line through legal and illegal means. And we know this because I'm going to ask you to look ahead into next week's verse number 12. And when it was day, some of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under an oath, saying that they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. More than 40 men are involved in this plot to kill Paul. If we can't find Paul guilty and sentence him to death, then we'll just kill him ourselves in the streets. That's the situation at hand. I think at this point, most people would just look for a way out. Maybe they would be willing to compromise their message. But we are going to see that Paul is just keeping on. He's going to continue preaching the gospel, no matter what is happening. That takes courage. It also takes faith. Now, I still don't think that religious leaders understood who they were really dealing with, especially when they killed Jesus. See, when they killed Jesus, they thought that it would silence what he was teaching. Then what happened? He rose from the dead. And then he continued to speak to people. They threatened Paul with death for doing the same thing. Maybe they thought that they could intimidate him to be quiet. But that didn't work because Paul knows who conquered the grave. If you're here and you have never accepted Jesus into your life, maybe you're wondering why Christians are so willing to come to church every Sunday morning, why they dedicate their lives to the service of this man who died and rose again and ascended into heaven 2,000 years ago. The answer is simple. It's because we know him. We have a relationship with Christ. Like Paul, we know that Jesus is still alive. Jesus is still in charge. And because of that, when a person places their faith in him, we rejoice because we know that they get to live forever in heaven with Jesus. Paul understood that our time here on earth is very limited, and he's telling people about Jesus. He's focused his life on that because that is our reward, our ultimate deliverance. In conclusion, what do we see in the life of Paul? What do we need to understand about our own lives? Respect, courage, discipline, humility, and faith. Yes, there is going to be times when we make a mistake, maybe multiple mistakes. We need to own that mistake. We need to take personal ownership and show the humility that we receive through it in order to earn respect from others by apologizing for those mistakes. Notice something else though. God doesn't deliver Paul from his trial. He goes with Paul through the trial. He gives Paul integrity through distress. And he will give you the same thing. You just have to trust him. Jesus is our deliverer in this life, but it has to be in the will of the Father for that deliverance to happen. God doesn't open the prison doors and let Paul walk out. He's still in prison. God doesn't calm down the religious leaders. They still want to kill him. But God is still with Paul on this road coming up, on what is happening ahead. The same promise is also there for you and me. God knows the road that is ahead of all of us. If you give your life to Him, He's going to walk with you through all of it. And then He will give you strength to endure. God will give you hope for the future and in this life. He will work within you to use the events of life, the good and the bad, in order to shape you into the person that He has created you to be. Maybe you have become stagnant in that molding process, and He had to allow things to happen in order to have you release yourself. It's kind of like in the military. When you go to boot camp, they psychologically break you down in order to build you back up how they want you. It's the same with God. In order for you to become the person that He has created you to be, you have to be broken. You have to be at your lowest so that you turn to Him and you trust in Him. He will work within you. He will guide you. He will help you because He has created you. God took a Pharisee named Saul, who was as judgmental as all those other religious leaders. And He turned Saul into the apostle of great integrity. And that will happen to you as long as you truly accept Jesus into your life. He will do the same for you. When the false accusations arise, keep this verse that I'm about to tell you at the ready in order to lift you up in encouragement. 1 Peter 3:16, having a good conscience, that when they defame you as evildoers, those who revile your good conduct in Christ may be ashamed. If you're here today and you have not accepted Jesus as your Savior, or you have accepted Him, but you're not fully giving yourself up to Him, you're not fully trusting in what He can do for your life, come forward, come to His cross, give it all to Him today. Accept the changes that God wants to create in your life. No matter what it is that you believe about yourself, you need saving. You need molding. You need changing. And Jesus is the only way who will carry you and give you refuge, give you the strength, give you the courage, give you the humility to continue into this life and through this life. All you have to do is have faith. Accept Him into your life. Receive His grace that only God can give you. Come and see how God can change your life for the better today. But it's going to take your spiritual integrity to make it happen. This is the moment. This is the time. This is where we are to give our full faith and trust in Him for everything that is going on in our life. This is the moment to give up ourself, give up our pettiness, give up our hurts, our pains, and give it to Him. Put it at His feet, the feet that were nailed to the cross for you, so that you wouldn't have these burdens to deal with. Each of us have been created for specific things to do for His ministry. We have to give ourselves up and pick up our cross, follow Him into battle today, and stay there. Sometimes I wonder if people think when I say the final words, what I say, if it's just lip service. It's not. I truly do love you. Each and every person, whether you're here in person, online, or listening to the radio, and you're hearing my voice, I love each and every one of you. I don't want you to suffer through pains. It pains me to see it. And I wish I could help more than what I give as best words as I can to help you through those moments. But I can't do it. I can't take it away. but God can. Give it to Him. Trust in Him to the point where you know He will take it. Allow yourself to live with integrity through your disasters. I love you, but God loves you more than I ever could. And I do pray that you have a blessed week.